Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. I enjoyed the talks this morning. So some similar themes coming up here, which I think is good because it shows we're all on the same page, but I'm here to give a government perspective and what it looks like from the National Cybersecurity Centre before I hand over to some of these talks that have promised to raise a laugh. So I'll put that off to the next one for now, so sorry about that, but here's my take. Anyway, so hopefully lots of these things are not surprises, but the National Cybersecurity Centre's mission is to make the UK the safest place to live and work online. As many of you will be aware, our remit extends across the whole UK from what we call the kind of top-end high threat of military intelligence security in that field, all the way through central government, local government, and individual citizens and small businesses. So the remit covers a huge range of potential markets. And I should also highlight, sandwiched in the middle of that, of course, is critical national infrastructure, which is high up the list of quite a lot of people in this room, I think. So we are the National Technical Authority for Cybersecurity, and that means we advise other government departments, regulators, policymakers on how to get the best out of the technology that we use. A big part of that is working with contacts around this room in industry, academia, other bits of government, so quite a few recognisable and friendly faces here, so that's good. So a few observations. Again, some of these are consistent with things people said this morning, so I think that's probably good to reinforce those themes. But again, sorry, Carsten mentioned I have no problem being interrupted, so if people do want to stop and ask a question, then please do. That will make sure this is more relevant to the audience than just me standing up here wittering. So some of the observations about the challenges we're facing at the moment. We're seeing the threats evolve. We're seeing more attacks, more targeting of systems that matter to us, and as new technologies get used, they themselves become under attack. A lot of people this morning mentioned complexity as well as vulnerability. We've got a lot of legacy out there. There's a huge amount of it. And actually, often the hard thing, and I'm going to come back to this quite a lot, is doing fixes that are relatively simple on individual devices, but doing them at scale across massive estates of independent, autonomous things, as well as people, machines, whatever. The complexity turns out to be almost the biggest adversary here, and it's very hard to find out relatively simple pieces of information about large numbers of things at once. So I think that's a major theme. And opportunity cost of security investment, another thing I'm going to come back to. There's a lot of expertise in this community and beyond on what technology can do to improve security, things we can do in engineering processes to make things better, but all of them cost money. And so they all need to be offset against other things that companies can do which might make them more profit or get them to market sooner or increase their shareholder value in other ways. And so we have to make a case for doing these things in that context, not just in the case of this is a jolly good thing that everyone really ought to do because it's good practice. And so part of what I'm talking about here is how we incentivize that behavior beyond just describing what good practice looks like, which I think this community has done an exceptionally good job at over the 9 years, I think it is, 10 conferences, 9 years, as I said this morning, of putting together what good looks like, which is a really important part of this. And then the next part is, okay, how do we get there from here? Some of the technical challenges we see. Product defects, often well-known classes of vulnerability. We do often talk about, see excellent pieces of research on new esoteric attacks in novel fields and really interesting ways of doing over devices. Actually, in the wild, more often than not, it's another buffer overflow or a badly configured network interface or something that gets missed past or a set of commands that just nobody was ever expected to have to issue that have an unintended consequence. We know a lot of this stuff. It's fixing it at scale. We often see tactical fixes. It's relatively easy, given a vulnerability, to look at the code that's vulnerable, propose a fix, patch, roll out, carry on to the next one. How do we trace back to root causes? How do we encourage people to actually look at what is the reason behind this? How far back in the production chain can we fix a problem such that it doesn't happen again and we save everyone else work in the long term? Again, easy to say, much harder to make it happen in practice, as anyone who's ever worked on a project like this with a deadline will know. Unquantified risk. We're still not as good as we'd like to be about precise measuring how much a risk is. How much does it cost? How much is it worth spending to mitigate? we can all talk anecdotally about bad things that could happen or have happened that had consequences, but how do we get really rigorous about actually offsetting costs and against the potential impacts? And lastly, but not leastly, the costs are often not borne by the person that bought the product, which means the person that bought the product is not incentivized to spend more money on improving the security because they're not actually mitigating their own risk, they're mitigating somebody else's. Example was sort of something like the Mirai botnets, which were compromised security cameras, which are actually used to launch a denial of service against a third party. The third party was impacted, not the people who purchased the cameras. So you could argue that there was never a security outcome for the actual owners of the devices. It was all the third parties that got attacked. So what are we doing about it? This is past, present, and future, so a few things that have already happened that should be familiar to people, but sort of starting to look forward as well. The PSTI Act's got mentioned quite a few times today already, something we're very proud of, and I say that as NCSC, but of course this is a team effort. It was led by DCMS initially and then DCIT following reorganizations, but lots of people in this room contributed to the consultations that went into producing that. There's an impact, as people have started to say, in devices deployed in the UK. But further than that, some of the work that went into that became standardized as the ETSI EN 303645, which can then subsequently be referenced by other legislation and other regulations in other jurisdictions, which means firstly, we expand our impact, but also that's much easier to use for companies with a global market, which, again, as discussed this morning, is pretty much all of them these days. So it's really important that as well as leading the way on what good legislation looks like, we're actually helping others follow and helping improve consistency across the board rather than encouraging fragmentation. I've just called out there the three key things we were trying to emphasize with the PSTI Act. Again, simple stuff at scale. We all know that on its own does not fix all security vulnerabilities, but there's lots of relatively little in technical terms ways we can move the needle that make things better across the board. So it would be really good if devices didn't have hardwired passwords. That is now a common consensus. It's very hard to argue that's not the case. So that's the kind of thing we can write into legislation. Support lifetime. Again, I think there was a talk earlier today about can I query whether a company providing a product is still in business? Are they still providing updates to a product? The fact that it still works isn't sufficient. I need to know that something's going to get fixed if it gets broken. And lastly, if it does get broken, does the company find out about it? Is there a process to actually do something? This all sounds relatively simple, but again, fixing it at scale fixes an awful lot across the ecosystem. So this is a really good way of starting. Here's a quick shout out to an advisory that NCSC published quite recently, raising awareness of a China link campaign targeting thousands of connected devices. It's important that we do this to, again, raise awareness that the threat is real. Devices are under attack. We have some information we are able to share about possible origins of that attack and the kinds of things that the attackers are looking to do. Interestingly, when you read down into the detail of this, it's not a sort of advanced, sophisticated attack vector that requires detailed explanation. The fixes is all about stuff I've already talked about. Get your devices up to date, understand your intake, make sure things are patched and supported. It's just good cybersecurity hygiene at scale. So here's another one that's coming in the near future, again in conjunction with DCIT and a whole range of other partners. I'm sure there's people in the room who've contributed to this conversation too. Producing a software code of practice, again, establishing a baseline for what good software development looks like in terms of management, governance, and also what good technical measures can be. There's been a consultation which is actually just closed, so again, hopefully a few people managed to contribute to that, but look for the response which is being produced as we speak, and will be launched in the new year. In addition to producing the code of practice, there will be an assurance layer, which again helps manage the incentive side of things. So we've described what good looks like, and then also we're going to encourage people to actually meet there and provide incentives to do the right thing. I won't stay too long on this one because I know that's the subject of another talk this afternoon, but I can't stand up in front of a group of people in this forum without mentioning digital security by design. Another thing that the UK government has been involved in, and NCSC has been an active supporter of, is a project that many of you know to build in security at the hardware level. And it's another example of where a huge amount of engineering effort has gone in, lots of academic work pulled through into real engineering, and as we speak, we are starting to see commercial offerings appear that actually meet some of these goals and implement some of these technologies, which is wonderful. The next step is once again to encourage uptake. So how do we incentivize the adoption of technologies? It turns out that the engineering on its own is not enough. We need the incentives to be there to encourage investment at the right level to get the resilience we all know we need. So this brings on to where we're looking in the future, trying to build an actual piece, a programmatic approach to having a more detailed conversation about what market incentives look like. Not government policy. No, I have to put that because it's not. We're not a policy organisation. We're a national technical authority, and so we advise other bits of government on making policy. But this is a conversation about what policies could look like in some of these areas. It's quite important we have the conversation before we make the policy. Otherwise, we get it wrong. And so this is the start of that conversation, and a key part of it is talking to engineers and technologists, but also moving beyond those spheres and into the worlds of legislation, liability, and indeed even economics to try and understand why some of the behaviours we consistently see in the marketplace don't provide us the resilience that we know as technologists and as civil servants that we know we want from our digital economy and our digital infrastructure. The market forces we expect to drive those things currently don't seem to be. And so how do we understand that and communicate it to the groups we have of economic thinkers and policymakers who understand these issues far better than me, but might need more help understanding the technological options which this community and others have provided. So what are our options around things like a liability framework? It's pretty clear, again, conversations this morning, talking about critical infrastructures, and again, talking to international partners. More regulation, more legislation is required. It's going to be really easy to get this wrong. You can over-legislate, we could demand particular technologies that stifle innovation, or we could establish principles that put the onus on the right parties to innovate and look after their infrastructure in the right way. So this is a conversation we need to have that starts now. Possibly financial incentives, one way or the other, might be part of this package. Another key part is transparency. So a lot of cybersecurity is kind of opaque, especially if you're a non-expert looking at a big block of circuitry or code or even a finished product. It's quite hard for a non-expert and actually pretty tricky for an expert to make a really measurable discussion of how secure that is, how well maintained is it, what can I actually say about it. So what are the transparency initiatives we can use, firstly perhaps in legislation, but actually backed by technology? What innovations do we need to give us the transparency we need? I don't think that's a particularly new idea, but phrasing it in terms of economics and policy means we can engage a different set of people in helping us make it. And it's a different language to learn, and that's what we're going to have to do. Lastly, but not leastly, same point, collaborative partnerships. We're going to need to speak to people from different sectors, different sets of experience, different sets of motivations, and we're going to have to understand how those work. Same goes for international collaboration, working with partners in other countries and jurisdictions to make sure that what we do is consistent. Again, points made this morning about fragmentation. We're not going to win if every single location has every sector has a completely different set of technology requirements. So I'll rattle through some slides. I think we might have a minute or two for questions if people want.
Thank you so much. Let's give Paul a round of applause. Any other questions?